Hi, my name is Lefler, and I don't know why I persevere sometimes. Nice stuff, by the way, and thanks for everyone who came out tonight. You know, this is a really cool thing we have here. Oh, I have a new text. Last week I started reading a passage from my short story, Trask with Pecs of Steel, and it has, this is the passage I was reading contains a love scene. And so I promised this love scene, and then it turned out the passage that I chewed off was too long, and I ran out of time before we even got to any of the sex. And Rosedrop Russ was, for one, told me that he was disappointed. So that alone, you know, told me that I needed to at least wrap it up somehow. It was just hanging over my head. This is just hanging over my head, basically. And I spent like 2 minutes setting it up, and I can't do that now, or I won't finish it. So this is not going to make any sense, but it doesn't anyways. This is just it's a story that's set in the mid-1800s in the Oregon coast, and it's based on Don Barry's novel of Trask, and so all the characters in that and everything, and but then my attempts at humor with anachronism and surrealist imagery. Anyways, here we go. One of Solomon's slaves, the old man, emerged stumbling through the wickets of the cast-iron tree-great fellows from the hedge Trask had spent all summer sculpting. He had been captured and enslaved by different tribes so many times in his long life that he had forgotten his original band. All the coastal tribes were slavers, and the Chinook, of which the Clatsups were one band, had once been middlemen in the trade for the whole coast, go-betweens for the various northern raiders, the Nootka and the Tlingit, and even little bite-sized Tlingets, and the tribes of the interior where no one ever wants to be sold into slavery, believe me, who wish to buy. His dirty old body leaped back as Trask forcefully flexed his pecs at him. Terror seized the old man's eyes and throat, but beneath the terror there was a sense of excitement and of anticipation. Trask reached for his pipe, but stopped to investigate his water chestnut pulp-covered, pinkyless left hand, and brazenly sucked on the palm, gurgling, hot cake batter, yow. After a long, uncomfortable pause, he leaned closer and whispered into the old man's ear, Quemo nasa hatsi kichi. And immediately they fell to the ground, entwined in rapturous carnality, the romance of the moment heightened by the intense moon glow, now a blue-tinted bath made hazy by the stirred-up dirt and vegetation on the hillside. The minutes stretched into hours, the hours into what seemed like about half an hour. Afterwards, Trask attempted to rise, but the old man held him wrapped in his bony legs and said, "Where do you think you're going, Pookie?" The old man coyly drooled onto a leaf while fondling his left big toe, and Trask was once again aroused, and so began another round of torrid and potentially bestial whoopee. At last, the old man unleashed his final climactic moan and pushed away from Trask. Trask rose up and looked down at the shivering figure that lay at the base of the cast-iron tree-great fellows. He grinned madly at the old man's almost cherubic face, slack and pale. Then, without expression, he grabbed the old man under the armpits and dragged him to the front porch, scarred and pitted from the hard use, and plunked him onto Reuben's mat. Over his shoulder, he called out to Hannah, "All right, don't come out here or anything." He walked into the house as Hannah was coming out of the bedroom. Their eyes met, and Hannah turned away, embarrassed for herself, and for Trask, who turned away, embarrassed for himself, just as Hannah turned further away, embarrassed for herself, and for Trask, who turned even further away, just as Hannah turned so far away that she was no longer in the house, but was actually sneaking Solomon, who was embarrassed for both of them, out of the back door, embarrassed for itself and for Trask, who in turn completed a circle, embarrassed for itself and for Trask and for Hannah and for Solomon, who wasn't embarrassed for the circle and only a little bit for the back door, which was too scarred and pitted from the hard use to engender anything but sympathy and an emphatic clearing of one's throat. Solomon sneaked around the side of the cabin and lit the porch light, knowing that Trask would turn and come out onto the porch to turn the light off because he was trying to conserve electricity. Trask eventually did come out onto the porch and saw that the remains of the shirt that Hannah had been working on yesterday were hanging in the sunlight. "So I see," he said, having come out onto the porch as he had just done, that is, come out onto the porch, which basically had the effect of his arriving onto the porch. "Was he drunk when he came by?" Solomon asked sneakily, referring to the pantsless elderly waif huddled at his feet. Now Hannah, carrying the coffee pot, had also come out onto the porch. "No, Reuben doesn't drink," was Trask's reply. Hannah hung the coffee pot on Trask's left nipple, still erect with passion. Trask assumed that Hannah was a pair of spectacles that was handing him a lottery ticket. "Hallo it locum," the old man muttered vaguely. "Hallo it locum, lahuk, mahul." His eyes opened wide as doubloons, wide as saucers, big saucers with lots of milk for the kiddies, wide as the Missouri River with the junk and the debris and the steamboats, etc. He pointed at the moon, its horrendous glow forsaken by the entire cast. Trask's rippling pectora majoris subverted the proximate magnetic field, attracting Reuben toward the scene and causing the coffee pot to float up into the eaves of the porch, or whatever. "Wake up," said Trask. He began to slap the old man's face with his absurdly protruding pectoral titties in a steady rhythm, back and forth, based in part on a scene from another story in which he was a supporting character. Back and forth, then from side to side, and forwards and backwards came the swats until eventually the old man suffered a massive subdural hematoma and various other traumas and went into shock, lapsed into a coma, and was soon dead. Hannah buried her index finger in the folds of the old man's turkey neck to feel for a pulse. She gave Solomon a sad eye, and she and Solomon picked up the old man's body and began carrying it to the wooded patch just around from the hedge. "Wake up, Sawash," said Trask, and began slapping him again as he followed alongside. "Leave him alone for a while," said Hannah. Trask ignored her and continued to slap the old man with the force of his unfettered pectora borealis. "I think he's coming around," Trask exclaimed to the moon. He increased the velocity of his slapping and incorporated an occasional high knee lift. "You can stop now," said Hannah, remembering why she didn't enjoy days when Trask didn't work. She nodded quietly to Solomon, who sneakily gave her a sneaky look, and then they lowered the old man's corpse to the ground. Solomon sneaked around for a moment, then returned with a shovel, brandishing it in a deliberate but ineffective attempt to not appear sneaky. Uninterrupted, Trask continued his brutal pectoral assault. He assumed that his chain of events had been engineered to result in marinated pork. "Let the games begin, Sowash," he announced. "I like my odds," and reached for a tree branch for support, extending his arms to the way maximum extreme they would even go, allowing him to continue his musculiturgical brutusosity with his pecs of steel and everything. He should be waking up any time now, he volunteered without missing a breath. Solomon finished digging the grave like a sneaky person and stepped back. He and Hannah allowed the force of the continued beatings to coax the cadaver into the grave. "That looks like a good idea. I could use a short nap," said Trask as his toes curled into the mossy soil underfoot. As Trask fell to his knees, he did not detect the trace of anger on Solomon's facial countenance on the front part of his head. "You owe me. You killed my slave," said Solomon in a low tone, and looked up into the heavens where the coffee pot drifted in silhouette across the moon near the southern horizon. Trask began snoring well before he had reached out fully on the ground, before he had stretched out fully on the ground next to Reuben, while dawn approached and the plains were about to welcome the Earth's new sun. Thank you.